Hi, mystery readers. I'm Alexandra Amor. This is It's a Mystery Podcast, and I'm here today with Alan Petersen. Hi, Alan.
Hi, Alessandra. How you doing?
Very well. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. It's a Friday, so that's always good.
Yes, yeah. Excellent. Well, let me just give our listeners a little bit of an introduction to you. Alan Petersen writes the high octane Pete Maddox thrillers. He lives in San Francisco, where he's working on publishing books number 3 and 4 in the series this summer, and we're recording this in June 2017. And Alan is also the host of the Meet the Thriller Author podcast, which we'll talk about a little bit. And we've had some of the same guests on, I notice, Renee Polish and John W. Mefford, to name a couple.
Oh, yeah.
So welcome
Small
to,
world.
it is a small world. Yeah, exactly. Lots of mystery fans out there. So um, why don't you give us a little bit of an introduction to Pete and his world and what he's up to?
Well, Pete Maddox is in the first book, he's in CIA, and he's the station chief down in Venezuela during the Hugo Chavez coup of 2002. So it's kind of based a little bit on historical, stuff that happened in real life, but of course it's all fiction. And so yeah, through the book, he's now currently he's no longer in the CIA. He's a freelancer, and so yeah, it just goes about helping people and kicking butt.
Very good, as a good thriller hero should do. Um, and how did you come up with this character? Where did he come from, do you think?
Well, I've always loved the thrillers. When I started to write this book, I knew I wanted somebody who was kind of like one of those tough guys, And I always had the idea of writing a book on Venezuela. I grew up in Latin America. I was born in Costa Rica, and so I lived in Venezuela when I was a kid for like 10 years. So I was very always interested in that, and especially with the problems that the United States and Venezuela has had in the last 10, 15 years or so. And then I read an article where Libya and Venezuela had a very close relationship. This is when Gaddafi was still alive and Chavez was still alive. And then I go, man, what would happen if if the United States found out that Venezuela and Libya were building terrorist camps in Venezuela in our own Western Hemisphere? And then that kind of just got the whole thing going for me. That was like the spark. I'm like, ooh.
Yes, yeah. And are you interested in politics in general?
Yeah, I was. I graduated. My college degree was in political science and history, so that's always been something I've been
Oh,
interested in. So yeah, I try not to get too political, but the politics are always in the background for these thrillers.
yes, of course, as they would have to be. And so tell me a bit about how you do the research for the CIA, because that's something I've always wondered about, because the CIA obviously isn't going to open their doors to you. So how do you figure out how an agent works?
Yes, that's true. Well, reading a lot of books. There's a lot of books out there from not nonfiction books from agents. Some authorized, some not. So that's and then just doing a lot of research online. And then the CIA themselves. I mean, they're secretive about what they do, of course, but their structure, all that stuff is actually very wide open. You can go to the CIA's website and they have a ton of information there. You'd be very surprised, like where they're located so that type of stuff is pretty wide open, and everything else is just imagination.
Okay, yeah. Well, I guess that makes sense. And then, so is he stationed in South America now as you're
No,
writing?
not anymore.
No.
No, yep. Now the first book takes place in the early 2000s, and then he's kind of run out of the agency, and so he's no longer in the CIA. So now he's doing freelance work for himself, and so taking care of bad guys privately versus working for the CIA or for the government.
Right. And so I guess he just goes where he's needed type of thing.
Right. Right,
Yes.
yeah, he's part of this network. This is the third book that'll be coming out in the summer. Looks at that a little bit more in depth. He's part of this private network, and people post jobs that need people like Pete Maddox, and so they all bid on these jobs, and then they go out and carry them out, and then they come back. So, and I actually got that idea from Elance. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's a outsourcing website.
Yeah.
And so I was a couple years ago. I was looking on Elance for something I needed, And I'm like, man, this would be kind of cool if there was like a Elan's website for like, finding these killers and paramilitary type people. And that's where the idea for Odd Jobs came from.
Oh, that's amazing. And Odd Jobs is going to be the third book in the series, we should say.
Right. Yeah. It's been delayed for a while, but it's coming out here in the summer. It's with the editor now. So woohoo.
Oh, good, good. And what's the fourth one called? I mentioned that in the introduction.
Yep. The fourth one's called The Forgotten Spy, and that's a story about basically at the collapse of the Soviet Union in the 90s, in the early 90s. One of their more ruthless KGB assassins ends up staying in the United States, and he's sort of forgotten. And then a cold case detective from Washington D.C. starts investigating one of his old murders, and that sort of brings everything up to the forefront. And Pete Maddox was hunting him back in the 90s, and so now he's kind of coming back to finish what he couldn't finish back in 91.
Oh, interesting. Okay, well, we'll keep our eyes open for that one. And I noticed that because at least the first book is set in South America, in Venezuela partially, I was wondering, because you grew up there and in other parts of South Central America, do you write the descriptions of the scenery and that kind of thing just from memory, or how does that work?
Yeah, some of it is from memory. A lot of it, though, I do always go and double check again because things have changed. I haven't been to Venezuela since I was like probably 12 years old, so it's been a while. But now with the YouTube and Google Street Views and all that, you can really, so like I know the areas, and so then I can really go in there then. But you can really then get a feel for any of the changes and what's going on right now and how to get from point A to point B. If you go to YouTube and you Google driving Caracas, for example, you'll see tons of videos of people just driving, so you can really get an idea of what it's like.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. And one of the things I imagined, I know one of the series I write is historical fiction, and so it's set in 1890 and in British Columbia. And it's one thing to sort of describe a place physically, and then it's another thing to kind of describe how it feels to be there. And I imagine you have a bit of an advantage when you're describing Venezuela or the other South American countries, that you probably remember a little bit about what it felt like what the air smelled like, what the foliage was like, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's why I chose it. Really, when I decided I wanted to write a thriller, I figured I needed all the help I could get, and so I figured it would be easier, quote unquote, if I at least knew the area, I knew, like you said, knew the climate, the weather, the humidity of Venezuela and all that stuff. And my second book, same thing. It was basically set in Central America and Honduras, and he's tracking this person through all Central America and ends up in San Francisco, which is where I live now. So it's just easier for me. Although with the third book, I wanted to get out of my comfort zone, and most of that action takes place in Europe. So that was so now I know. I got rid of that little crutch that I was using in the first two.
Yeah. Have you ever been to Europe?
Yeah, I've been to Europe, but not these. Not most of the adventure takes place in Prague, in in the Czech Republic. I've never been there.
Okay.
But some of it also takes place in London. I've been in London and Wales and Scotland. So yeah, so I did cheat a little bit with that.
That's the thing about thrillers, isn't it? That they do tend to be quite globe-trotting. You're sort of, the actors or the characters are all over the place.
Right. Yep. That's a fun thing. I think that's a fun part of it, and the readers like that part. They want the globe-trotting type of adventure. So usually most thrillers are set in a whole bunch of different spot areas, especially spy thrillers. Espionage. They're everywhere. So there's no borders really when it comes to those type of thrillers.
No, exactly. Yeah. And do you plan for the Pete Maddox series to go on for longer, or will you try something else at some point?
I do want to try something else. I have another series in mind, but I want to get to at least 7 books in this series before trying something new. People liked it, and I've been getting emails about where's the third book? When's it not coming out? When's it coming out? So, since there's interest, I'll continue it for now. But I do have another series planned that I want to do, more crime fiction. and I want to base it on a Costa Rican detective. Again, since I was born and raised in Costa Rica, my family all lives in Costa Rica. It's like I interviewed a detective down there, and so I know a little. That would be really, I really know about that area. So.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I noticed on your bio you were born in San Jose.
Mhm.
And have you been back? Is that where your family is?
Yep. I go back. My mother, my brother, my sister, they all live there. I'm the only one who lived here. My father was American though, so I'm half half,
Okay.
and so that's how I ended up in the United States. And so, but my mom and my brother and sister, they all still live in Costa Rica, and so I go down there and visit. My mom's actually visiting me here right now. She goes back on Tuesday, so
Oh,
we go back and
nice.
forth. She's 84. She's like, yeah, she comes up like no problem.
Wow, that's amazing. Oh, incredible. Um, and I'm trying to think of what my other question was. Oh, yeah, I know what I wanted to ask. So, with the learning that you've been doing about the CIA, I know so very little about it, and I was wondering, do people get recruited into the CIA, or do they join sort of like the way that people join the police department? They have an interest, they apply, that kind of thing.
It's both. It's both ways. Mostly, people just apply, just like any other job.
Okay.
But the CIA does they do recruit. They actually recruit on college campuses.
Mm-hmm.
They'll go out and they'll put up a sign saying we're hiring. So yeah, they do a lot of recruiting, and then they also recruit like people from the military. They'll recruit them as well. So it's both ways. You can apply. There's a whole job postings on their website of all the different type of jobs and people that they're looking for. So yeah, it's both ways.
Yes, yeah, I guess it's a corporation like any other, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean the real CIA and the real CIA agents are probably actually pretty boring compared to how they're portrayed in all the books. And actually, when I was in Costa Rica, I at the time I didn't know it, but I actually met a couple CIA people, and they're nothing like in the books. They're bureaucrats. They don't carry guns or anything like that. So
They're
at
not,
least not the agents.
right, yeah, they're not blowing stuff up.
No.
No. Um, and so you mentioned that the third book, Odd Jobs, is with the editor now. And do
Mhm.
you have a regular writing routine? Do you write every day? How does that work?
Yeah, I try to write every day, even if I'm not writing. Like right now, I'm going through two manuscripts, so I haven't been writing a new story. I do a little rewriting during that part. But even then, though, I try to write something like creative just to keep it going. So yeah, I try to write every day. It doesn't happen every day.
Hmm.
Sometimes I fail, but that is the goal.
Yes, yeah. And I imagine, well, one of the things I noticed about the reviews of your books on Amazon was that people talked about how tightly plotted they are, and they're really fast paced, and as a thriller should be. But you start them and can't put them down. So, do you find that you write a book and then you have to take a lot of stuff out to make it fast paced like that?
Yeah, yeah, big time. Like entire scenes out. I learned, the more you do this, the more you learn how to do it. My
Hmm.
first book, I had no clue what I was doing, and I actually have I've actually had it re-edited for the asset, so I have to actually upload that here because I had too much explaining, too much characters that you'll only see one and you don't see them, you don't see them again. So all that type of stuff I would have taken out. So I'm
Hmm.
like, well, if I would have taken that out today, I might as well go back and take that out now. So yeah, that a lot of stuff gets taken out, which just kind of stinks. But sometimes I reuse it though. I'll use it in another book or one of the scenes that I removed from the Odd Jobs. I'm going to use it as a little short story to give away at my website. So I try not to just trash it.
Exactly. Yeah. Repurpose it.
Yes, exactly. I like that. Repurpose it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No kidding. And so let's maybe shift gears just a little bit and talk about your podcast, Meet the Thriller Author. So, how did you get the idea to do that show?
Well, I've always liked to podcast. I've always been a fan of podcasting for like 10 years, way back when. And so when I started getting into writing and publishing and self-publishing, I started listening to all these writing podcasts. And and I love them. They're great, but a lot of them, most of them are focused on the marketing and the business part of it. So I thought it would be fun to have a podcast where I just talk to authors about the writing process, and 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 so then I figured I better narrow it down a little bit more. And so I focused on thrillers because that's what I like and that's what I write. And so I said, oh, I'll just start interviewing authors that write thrillers. Although now I've expanded to include mystery and suspense as well. But that was the cusp of the idea of starting to interview authors.
Yes, yeah, and obviously you're a fan of the genre. And do you find that you learn a little bit from the authors you speak to? Not that you need to, but I know that for me, interviewing mystery authors is just an interesting way to kind of open my eyes to the ways that other people do things. Do you find that as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
learn I learn a lot, and I interviewed authors that are kind of like where I'm at, some that are starting, and then some big names, and I learn from everybody. And it's also, especially with the more successful ones and the ones who write prolifically, really they motivate and inspire me. Like so yeah, it's been a gas.
Yeah, the Russell Blakes of this world.
Yes, well, yes, he's in a whole different level when it comes to how he writes. Yeah, I remember that when I interviewed him, he was saying, "Oh, I'm gonna start this new series, and we'll see how it goes." And since then, I haven't published anything, and he's published like 5 books in that new series. I'm like, wow.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I don't think he does anything else
Yeah,
except maybe walk his dog on the beach or something.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, this has been amazing, Alan. It's been great chatting with you today, and I've really enjoyed it. So, why don't you tell our listeners where they can find your books?
Well, I'm on Amazon. I'm exclusive to Amazon right now, so that's really the only place they can find them. You can go to my website at alanpetersen.com, and there's information there. And I'm also on Twitter at Alan Petersen, and also on Facebook with my name. So yes, everything. If you type my name in, I should pop up on all the social media haunts.
Great. Okay, and we should say Petersen is Petersen.
Yes, yes, thank you. It is. Yeah, it's not Son and it's Alan. So there's two out. There's another Alan Petersen Sen out there who's a famous skateboarder, but
Oh,
that's not me.
no. No. Okay. Great. And so you think that Odd Jobs should probably be out later this summer?
Yep, later this summer, and then hopefully Odd Jobs will be out, within the next month or so,
Okay.
and then hopefully Forgotten Spy will be out, in the next couple months.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So I'll put links to everything you've mentioned in the show notes as well. And when Odd Jobs comes out, perhaps I'll update it with that cover and that kind of stuff.
Oh, that'll be great. Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah, I'd love to do that. Well, yeah, since we're coinciding pretty closely with your launch. Well,
Yep,
it's
I appreciate it.
no problem. So thanks again so much, Alan, for chatting with me. Take care.
Thank you. It was nice talking to you.
Bye bye.
Bye.